So it seems that Games Workshop have finally given the forces of the Adeptus Mechanicus a break. Massive rules and damage boosts for the army, the force getting a little bit less horde focused, and a much more functional and impactful Doctrina Imperatives. Let's talk about why the Admech players are weeping some joyful tears of oil right now. Hello and welcome back to Auspex Tactics, where today we're talking about the faction that maybe had the most to gain from the Balance Dataslate, and going through all the changes to the forces of the Machine God, including some seriously nasty stat line boosts. So far in 10th edition, Games Workshop have been making Admech players kind of annoyed at them. At the start of the edition, most of their datasheets aren't really very good, almost everything is really low threat, and people being forced to choose between Kataphron Breacher damage spam, or move blocking shenanigans with a bunch of Skitarii that don't do much damage, and then even doubling down on that in the last points update, though at that point they did say that they have some pretty major changes in store for the faction, that will be coming next time. For the most part, as you can tell, I feel like they've succeeded with this. The main thing that I think was on everyone's wish list were for Admech players to get more damage dealing units and just make each individual squad a lot more threatening on the table, making sure their elite infantry were actually worth something. There's quite a few sources of changes for the Mechanicus. They did have some impact for the core rules changes of 40k, though maybe a little bit less than some factions out there. The single biggest change was to the Doctrina Imperatives, which does do that job of just making the force far more dangerous in multiple different ways. But then on top of that, there were a whole bunch of datasheet changes as well, actually going in and changing things unit by unit, rather than trying to just sweep everything away with just one broad brush change. There was lots of that in the Balance Dataslate, but actually there were a fair few other things hiding in their errata documents that popped up alongside the changes. And then of course they've got the Minotaur and Field Manual. That one was the one that increased a bunch of Admech costs for their new abilities, though honestly I feel like the points costs have done them okay. Most things have gone up a bit, but that's kind of nice to take the edge off them being 40k's most expensive faction by a long way. And the majority of units have gained far more in threat than they've lost in terms of points increases in my opinion. In any case, let's jump straight in, talking briefly about the core changes. Some of these are impactful to certain units, though maybe not to the faction as a whole. The stratagem change thing doesn't affect them too much. It did mean that they needed to change the Skitarii Marshal's extra stratagem option ability, and that got replaced by a once per game battle shock cancelling type rule. On the whole though, I think that was probably a positive. The extra stratagem type thing, you still needed to pay full CP cost for that, and I was a bit unsold as to how much value it added. Cancelling Battle Shock definitely can be handy though, particularly in the age of actions. Otherwise, indirect fire was nerfed, which seems like it's a further nerf to the Belisarus energy cannon. I feel like this thing is going to be even less relevant as an artillery piece now, though I guess in theory could get a little bit more AP a bit easier from the Conqueror Doctrina. It does mean that the Protector Doctrina that in theory should be quite good for it really isn't. The Hazardous change changed Hazardous results to deal 3 mortal wounds to an individual model, and that could actually be good for the Kataphrons destroyers with their big plasma cannons. If they're led by Tech Priest Dominus to give them a feel no pain type save, they might not instantly die, which is kind of nice. Cole can move through ruined walls, and we'll get on to other changes for him later. And there were a few changes to some detachment specific things. The Hunter cohort Veiled Hunter thing gets to redeploy before first turn is known rather than after, so a nerf there. Shroud Protocols only goes out to 18 inches rather than the big 12 inches that it has, so you can't hide Hunter Cohort units quite as easily, and I guess that might be a small step to balancing the Hunter Cohort versus other detachments. And the Incantation of the Iron Soul and other things that give you save against mortal wounds will now work against devastating wounds again, so that's a small boost there. The really big change though was to Doctrina Imperatives. More units can access it now, and the Doctrinas got so much better in themselves. One of the major criticisms for Doctrina Imperatives were that most other factions get their faction rule on literally everything pretty much, but the Admech one was only locked to things that could program, more for lore reasons than game balance I guess. The idea was that you program your servitors and your Skitarii, where the Tech Priests don't get the advantages as they're doing the programming. Games Workshop have chosen to basically do away with that lore distinction though, and give you your Doctrina Imperatives on the Tech Priests and the Electro Priests as well. I guess it's not like they don't have plenty of technology built into them. I'm sure we could see it as firing up their own different types of logic circuits. For the Tech Priests themselves, it might help out a little bit, maybe with the Conqueror helping out their weapon skill, though it seems really nice for both Fulgurite and Corpuscari priests. The Conqueror one looks like it could be a really big advantage to them. Extra weapon skill and also extra AP could be big for both units. For the Doctrina improvements, though, they do feel far more impactful, just full stop. They've basically got 3 different rules on each part of it now rather than 2, keeping the same heavy or assault keyword, and then gaining 2 new ones rather than the deployment zone restricted ones. Another positive is that both of the rules are actually impactful in melee in some way now, and that was another criticism of the rule. It basically helped out all the ranged units in the army, but not really the melee ones. So it meant that even if you did have units with the Doctrina Imperatives, then it might not be all that impactful if they were equipped with melee weapons. Good news for things like Ruststalkers and I guess Fulgurite Priests now. First up, we've got the Protector Doctrina, which means that Admech can seriously do good things with gun lines right now. The units gain the heavy keyword as they did before, so +1 to your hit rolls if you're stationary, but now they also just gain a flat +1 ballistic skill. So it means that if you take the Protector Imperative, things will be moving around hitting on a 3+, even if they can't remain stationary, which in 40k they can't always. But for anything that it does make sense just to sit and shoot for a turn and turn on maximal damage, you can hit on a 2+, which is nice. Finally, on top of that, if you're within 6 inches of a battle line unit or you're a battle line unit yourself, then you also get a -1 to hit in melee. That one's maybe a bit more incidental, but if you happen to be playing against a big enemy melee type force, that's going to be very impactful. All your units in close combat won't die quite as quickly, and between that and the Admech invulnerable saves, it could make a lot of melee units not hit quite as hard as they might expect to. The only thing that Protector lost was the AP debuff inside your own deployment zone, so your things won't be quite as tanky against enemy firepower there. But overall, I'd say that this is a massively better rule. The +1 ballistic skill is just an enormous boost to any firepower unit trundling around. The Conqueror Doctrina, though, I think is just as good, and for many armies even better. You still get the assault keyword, and often that's actually a bit more important than damage dealing. Being able to move extra far and still light up the enemy is a really nice combo. It's helpful for range and line of sight and things. This one now helps out your melee just with a flat +1 to weapon skill though, and it means that you get some boosts for ranged things and for melee, so if you've got a more hybrid or close combat focused army, then this is going to be one that's going to be gone for quite a lot of the time, I suspect. And then the battle line situational boost is a super nice one. Anything within 6 inches of battle line gets an extra AP -1 both at range and in melee, and that's just an enormous boost against certain armies with good saves like Space Marines. Anything that's lowish AP like AP1 or AP2 will get a serious lift out of that. This one just feels like it's an all-around damage boost. If you can stay within battle line, then your shooting's still more dangerous, you get to move faster, and your combat's much more dangerous as well. Overall, they both look really great. I feel like you could build an army to absolutely maximise one. Just decide that you want to build an army that's focusing around Protector and take loads of heavy gunline things, or build an army that's focusing around Conqueror, take loads of melee things, or stuff that profits from the extra AP. In reality, I suspect it's going to make sense to have a good mix of things that can do both, but you definitely feel like you could build armies that build around one or the other a bit more. The Cantic Thrallnet in the Skitarii Hunter cohort does seem like a nice one as well, potentially getting both of them, and now they overlap far better. Overall, I feel like this changed from a pretty mid-faction rule to one of the more impactful ones in the game. I think Games Workshop did really well with this. Adding extra fun damage choices was exactly what they needed. Otherwise, moving through the units, let's talk through new points and new rules updates. The Skitarii battle line are looking just as good as ever, I think. They went up to 90 points for Vanguard or 85 for Rangers. Rangers are now finally cheaper than Vanguard, and I feel like that will lead to people mixing it up between the two. I've seen far more people running Vanguard before. These guys will be pretty great with the new Doctrinas. They'll always get the second battle line buff bit, so always getting either extra AP or -1 to hit in close combat, which is rather nice. And they're going to be more important than ever to have along to give those boosts to other units as well, never mind the good things that they already did, like rerolls for Kataphrons. I think between that it's well worth the extra 5 or 10 points, and we'll still see loads and loads of these on the table. Talking of those Cataphron servitors, destroyers were 105 points for 3 of them, and they're unchanged. Getting no points change at all, but access to the new Doctrinas on a fairly scary firepower unit is a pretty serious thing. If you're building around Protector, then you could be getting a Ballistic Skill 3+ or 2+ on a fairly scary general purpose firepower units literally every turn. Conqueror could make them go faster, make those grav cannons get better AP, and as mentioned, the plasma version might not always kill itself if you gave them a Tech Priest Dominus, though I still feel like the Manipulus might be more tempting here. Otherwise, the breaches still seem absolutely solid. I guess they can potentially be embracing Conqueror really quite a lot of the time. If they're standing next to their battle line, they'll be able to advance and shoot, get the better weapon skill, and get better AP both at range and in melee, with all the hit rerolls still making them very accurate. They still look like they're going to be a pretty spectacular unit, and only going up 10% really isn't that bad on the points increase side of things. Both servitors still seem awesome. A particularly standout infantry unit that changed are the Skitarii Ruststalkers. They've been super underwhelming on the damage department since the index came out. Now though that looks like it's been heavily changed around, they went up to 75 points from the 60 they were before, and now rather than hitting like wet noodles, they hit spectacularly hard, and even more so in Conqueror Imperative. Ruststalkers can move very fast, they've got a good movement base and built-in movement rules for +1 to advance and charge or more near battle line, and can get even better than that in the Hunter cohort. And Games Workshop really didn't want to mess around with their damage output, as well as the potential weapon skill buff. They also got +1 attack and +1 strength, so your standard Ruststalkers are hitting at 4 or 5 attacks now, all at strength 5, and some flavour of devastating wounds, anti-infantry and precision depending on which loadout you take. Just for comparison to last time though, to highlight just how much their damage has gone up, for 5 of them with the blades in the Conqueror Imperative, pre-update you would have done around about 6 termagants worth of damage or around about 2 slain Space Marines. That's now gone up to around about 11 termagants or around about 4 slain Space Marines just for a 75 point squad. These guys just look ridiculously scary for a unit that can move so quickly, are fairly cheap, will be able to maul most infantry units, and still have devastating wounds that will make them far from irrelevant against tougher stuff. That's not even including the extra AP that you might have got as well if you're near battle line. Otherwise, for infantry and mounted things, the Electro Priests went up either 10 points for the Corpuscari, and the Fulgurites went up 15. It seems a fair trade-off for gaining Doctrinas in the first place, and then also the new boosted Doctrinas. Corpuscari are going to be very nasty if they can gain AP on any of those attacks, although spam saves they generate will make far more impact. And Fulgurites look really scary in melee and Conqueror. You could be getting +1 to hit and also extra AP on them, never mind any buffs that you can get from characters or detachments. The Tarazzi Sterilizers went up to 75, again can access AP a bit easier, and they were considered one of the strongest units before. And the Skystalkers are completely unchanged at 65 points. They look like they're still going to be rather godly in the Pariah Nexus missions with their deep striking and their movement shenanigans. They should be great at doing secondary objectives. Cerberus Raiders are unchanged at 60 points. Again, unchanged with boosted Doctrinas is absolutely great. They're going to be far more threat. And Cerberus Sulphurhounds just go up a little bit from 55 to 60. Again, both will be able to enjoy extra AP if they can get it from a battle line unit. Sicarian Infiltrators are also unchanged, as ever excellent with new Doctrinas, far more threat, and still doing the same goodness of infiltrating screening as they were before. I still certainly take at least one of these in an army. I feel like despite the points increases, virtually any unit that you look at does look like it's got a lot more exciting to put on the table. For vehicles, there were a lot of things that got far more radical datasheet shakeups. The Scorpius Dune Rider got a firing deck. This was hidden away in the FAQ and errata, which means that you could have a Tech Priest or a couple of Skitarii special weapons taking pot shots out at the top of it, which is fun. Again, extra AP seems like is a nice one from Conqueror for this one, though it'll certainly like Protector too. The extra AP seems particularly easy to achieve if you're going to have battle line units jumping out of it, only going up to 85 points, again overall seems like easily a win. The most radically rewritten datasheet was the Onager Dune Crawler. This one went up a big bump up to 160 points from 130, so a 23% point rise there. But basically all of its weapon profiles were rewritten to make them more dangerous, which combined with the boosted Protector Doctrina makes it a potentially very scary little gun tank. The neutron laser gained 3 shots at base and also has an extra +1 damage, so that's d6 +2 at strength 16 and AP 4. It looks like this one was maybe aimed to make it a bit better against actual tanks and monsters, and maybe a little bit less effective against elite infantry as it lost blast. Just looking at some rough numbers, if it's static compared with last time, and you took aim at a toughness 10 3+ save vehicle, you'd average around about 7 wounds to it or so, and before you'd average around about 4. And that's before accounting for the Protector Doctrina, which could make things even better. I still think it looks like one of the most interesting in a big central gun to take out enemy tanks and vehicles, on a walker that's really quite tanky in itself. Otherwise, the Phosphor Blaster caught up a fair bit in doubling the amount of shots it gets. You now get 12 shots at strength 6, AP 1 and damage 2, ignoring cover with twin linked. I guess that I still like both of the Doctrinas, though AP 2 on that seems pretty nice. I'm still not sure if that's enough to outcompete the things that can deal with tougher stuff though. The Eradication Beamer maybe got the smallest boost, it gained more reliability than it did damage, going from D6 shots to 2D3. Technically you've gone from 3.5 shots on average to 4 I guess, but the difference isn't huge. It was probably still one of the stronger options though before. And otherwise the Icarus Array plus Daedalus Missile Launcher, you got an extra missile shot out of that, and the Icarus Array remains unchanged, still fairly general purpose. Overall, I still feel like most of the loadouts are interesting enough, I guess. I'd probably still be most tempted by the Neutron Laser overall if you wanted dedicated anti-tank, but the rest all seem absolutely fine for their own niche. And otherwise it got a couple of other improvements. It gained Scuttling Walker, the rule that it had from the index back, so you can move over things and over bits of terrain that are less than 4 inches in height, and it could also tank shock a little bit better with its toughness 10. It was one of the vehicles that had that improved. In any case, good news for this one. A 2+ save and a good invulnerable save are pretty good, and now it's far more dangerous for the cost. It wasn't the only Admech big gun tank to improve though. The Scorpius Disintegrator only went up a tiny amount, up to 175 points. And again, that's a pretty big deal when it's getting the new Doctrinas out there. Though as mentioned, given the indirect fire nerf, I feel like the energy cannon is probably going to be less interesting than it was. Previously you could get it to hit on a 3+, but now you won't be able to even if you stack Protector Doctrinas and things. As mentioned though, it could potentially gain some AP. The Ferromite Cannon though got improved, so between that and potential Protector access, I feel like the tank's gained a massive amount compared with where it was, given it's only gone up 5 points. The Ferromite Cannon is basically a 3-shot las cannon now, 3 shots at strength 12, AP 3 and damage D6 +1, so some serious tank busting there, backed up by those disruptor missiles. And it still gets its +1 to hit against tanks and vehicles, so if you're moving around in Protector Doctrina, then you're hitting on a 2+. If you can take aim at a strength 10 3+ save vehicle out in the open, then you average around about 9 or 10 wounds on it between just the missiles and the cannon, and the stoppers can fire elsewhere. To me that seems like respectable enough damage output for a tank of that kind of cost, and given a fair few other things went up in cost more, I feel like it might have gained on the competition at least. Talking of competition though, next up we've got the Einstrider Ballistari. Their change was basically to swap twin linked on their guns for double the shots on their guns, which will be a flat increase against everything, though particularly good against anything that they were already wounding fairly successfully. So if those las cannons were wounding a vehicle on a 3+, or the same for those auto cannons, then you're generally winning out by a massive amount by getting the 2 shots. It equates to around about a 50% damage increase against things that you're wounding on a 3+, and again, as with basically all the rest of the things, if you throw in boosted Protector Imperative into the math, then it gets even better. Protector's going to be far more relevant for this guy now, given that they were unlikely ever to be stationary, so getting the +1 ballistic skill and hitting on a 3+ is a fairly flat increase for him normally. The points did go up by a big 40% though, went all the way up from 50 to 70, though just judging by those average numbers, if you're wounding on a 3+ with las cannons, then you've outweighed that on damage, and even better if you're firing with +1 ballistic skill. They will be far less durable per point, though given their durability was so standout good before, it's not like they're weak on the defensive front. 7 wounds at toughness 7 and a 5+ invulnerable save is annoying to deal with at 70 points, particularly for a walker that's genuinely quite threatening now. Finally, for the big datasheet improvements, we've got Belisarus Cawl. He was 150 points, and he still remains 150 points, though he was kind of rarely played before, so he did need some serious help. For the most part, his gain is just really quite a lot of random quality of life peripheral stuff, as opposed to any single major stat line boost. He's got Doctrina Imperatives himself, so he might be a little bit more dangerous on the offensive front. He can move through ruined walls as per the update to the core rules, so similar to Primarch's there. He had the monster keyword, so previously he couldn't. His movement's also been increased to 8 inches, so he's got a bit more threat when he's on the table. Should be able to move up and counterpunch the enemy a bit easier if they decide to get too close. And finally, his leadership buff Canticle ability was improved, called Binaric Courage. This one still gives you the +1 leadership thing, but now also gives Cawl himself the battle line keyword, so that could be very relevant for triggering those extra Doctrina Imperative buffs, or potentially other things for other units if you need it. Still certainly doesn't feel like one that you'd use all the time, particularly if you've got other battle line around, but could be a nice fallback option if all your Rangers or Vanguard get shot down and you don't need the reroll ones to hit or cover more than this. Given the improvements to all the other things though, I'm still not sure if Cawl's actually going to see as much table time as plenty of other stuff. Though given that he didn't change in points cost and got several peripheral boosts, I feel like if you want to run him he's far less bad than he was. Finally, to run through the other changes, the Archaeopters all went up a little bit, and they weren't very strong before. I wouldn't expect them to gain anything on the rest of the units in the data slate. Castellan robots went up to 190 points from 180, and seeing as they don't normally get the new Doctrinas, then outside of their own special detachments, they're probably losers out of this update more than winners, sadly. In the Cybernetica cohort, though, they've gained a lot of threat. In particular, they liked the Conqueror Doctrina before, and they'll like it even more now. +1 weapon skill is rather awesome with those scary Castellan fists, and the AP buff could really help out with their shooting if they can coordinate with some battle line stuff. Advance and shoot certainly doesn't hurt as well with those great big flamers. Finally, on the vehicle front, the Sidonian Dragoons both went up. The Radium Jezzail one is 55 points, and now works out to be quite a bit cheaper than any of the other options. It's 15 points less than the Iron Strider, though I feel like given you upgrading the sniper shot to a big twin las cannon with sustained hits, the upgrade's usually still going to be worth it. The Taser Lance Dragoon went up from 60 to 70, and again this one will absolutely like the new Conqueror quite a lot, and 70 points is still a very tough vehicle for this cost. You basically still have all the advantages of the Iron Strider itself, but you also gain stealth as well. Those Taser Lances with +1 to hit and potentially extra AP in a pinch certainly could be a pretty heavy charge threat. Finally, we've got the other characters where a lot of them didn't change. Mostly still good news here, given that they gained the Doctrinas, so might occasionally get some damage boosts from time to time. Plus, largely the things that they're leading got more threatening, and maybe a bit more justifying the inclusion of a character for them. The ones that did see increases were quite a big increase for the Tech Priest Engine Seer, which went up a big 15 points for some reason. Not entirely sure of the logic for that. Maybe it's because the vehicles that they can buff get a lot more threatening. If Onagers and the Scorpius tanks are far more worth it, then I guess these guys will be too. Seems like one could still be worth it though if you're taking multiple big scary tanks between the Feel No Pain and the Healing. The Manipulus still easily seems worth it at 65 points, buffing certain big Kataphron units. And otherwise, despite being unchanged, the Marshals perhaps changed a fair bit, swapping out his stratagem thing for the Battleshock debuff. Finally, the Veiled Hunter enhancement is down by 10 points in the Skitarii Hunter cohort. That's the one that allows the redeployment that we talked about earlier, and that one has to be done after both players have set up their armies now, so can't be done after you know who is going first, and at 10 points I still think it's pretty much auto-include. Redeploying units like that is well worth it for 10 points. Overall, seems like it's a pretty great day for the servants of the omnissiah though. Massive damage buffs for a whole load of units, things won't be quite as hoardy when they're on the table, though I still think that battle line's going to be perhaps even more key than it was before. I still expect a lot of lists to start with a whole bunch of Skitarii, maybe a few of them in Dune Riders. It does certainly seem like you could go pretty heavily into building for one of the two Doctrinas if you really wanted to. Melee Admech look massively more viable than they were before. The Ruststalker changes are brutal on their own datasheet, never mind extra weapon skill and AP that you can get. And one thing that did maybe stand out a bit to me is that you can get Fulgurite Electro Priests with the combination of +1 weapon skill, +1 AP, +1 attack, and +1 strength when they're charging in the Data Psalm Conclave. You could have a few units of them that could demolish just about anything on the charge there, or that's with zero stratagem or character investment as well. Mechanic Thrallnet in the Hunter cohort still seems great as well. You'd have the combination of the Assault keyword and extra AP if you're on battle line, all layered on one Skitarii unit, which seems like it's a pretty potent combo, and even -1 to hit and +1 weapon skill if they wind up in melee too. Ruststalkers in the Hunter cohort still seem absolutely nasty, and even if they haven't been helped out elsewhere, the Cybernetica cohort still seen a big buff, with Castellans getting the new and improved Conqueror protocol. Weapon skill and AP will be enjoyed by them. In any case though, let me know what you're thinking about playing with the new Admech down in the comments below, and let me know any other fun combos or things that you've noticed. If you've enjoyed the video, then feel free to subscribe to Auspex Tactics. I'll certainly keep the regular 40k videos coming. I do tend to post new ones just about every day, and I'll certainly be covering a fair bit more from the balance updates. Finally, if you've been enjoying the videos on the channel, I would just like to mention that Auspex Tactics does have a Patreon page as well, and you can find that linked in the video description if you'd like to help support and keep all the videos coming. Channel patrons do get a fair few advantages, seeing certain videos early, regular votes to see what sort of things come next on the channel, and automatic entry into the regular prize giveaways with the chance to win some big model kits each month. If any of that sounds good to you, or you'd just like to help support, the link is down in the video description. In any case, a massive thank you for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.